Welcome to the Supported Living Property Podcast with your host, me, Lisa Brown, the place to learn about supported living property investing. Hi Alice, it's great to have you back for another session. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell people a bit about you?
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Alice. I've worked in housing since I was 18. I've worked in various different types of accommodation, different support providers. I've worked for some big RPs, some slightly smaller ones. And last year, I joined a wonderful company called Havencare, Homes and Support Limited. And they are predominantly a care provider. They've been a care provider for a long time and they're very good at it. And increasingly, they've seen a need to also provide accommodation and housing. And so we have a small portfolio of properties.
And that's what we're talking about today, really, aren't we? We're talking about the challenges that you're encountering because your housing arm is a different organisation to your care arm, isn't it? It's a separate organisation.
So it's actually within the same
Yeah.
organisation at the moment, but almost two separate functions, I would say, within the same remit. As in, we have housing officers who provide the housing related support, and then we have teams of fantastic support providers and registered managers who are CQC registered for their care, but under housing, we're providing under kind of that supported housing element.
And so, what you're encountering at the moment is a whole load of challenges in providing the housing, but not being a registered provider. And when we're talking about a registered provider, an RP, we're talking about an organisation that's regulated by the Regulator of Social Housing, the RSH in England, aren't we? That's what we're talking about when we're saying RPs. So the fact that you guys are providing housing but not being an RP, why is that a challenge, Alice? What are you struggling with?
where do I start? It's an understandable challenge in some ways, but a challenge nonetheless. I think when you are talking about a registered provider, providing exempted accommodation, the local authorities are confident in that being almost a cost neutral exercise or a cost neutral property, as the DWP will sort of reimburse up to 100% of any cost to the local authority for rents.
And that's a
And
really key. I'm just going to explain that to people because it's such a key thing, isn't it? So if you've got exempt rents, which are the enhanced housing benefits you're going to get for a lot of the supported living properties, you're working with a registered provider of housing, then central government's going to reimburse that local authority for 100% of those rents. So where local authority budgets are incredibly squeezed at the moment, that makes it really appealing. And so what we're seeing is local authorities going, actually, these are the guys we need to work with because we're going to get all of our rents back from central government. Whereas if they work with you guys, what would they get back from central government?
it's around about 60%. That can fluctuate. I've discovered if people do not have enhanced benefits, such as a disability benefit or a sickness benefit, actually sometimes it can be even less. If you don't provide evidence of that, which again, you can see and understand the challenges there. And I think specifically when we're talking about budgets and increase in homelessness, the huge increase since COVID that we knew would happen. I think it's a real challenge for local authorities to balance the need for housing whilst also not putting themselves into huge financial difficulties.
Yeah, absolutely. But there are some other challenges as well with being a housing organisation that isn't an RP. There are other things that you're finding that make it harder for you. What would they be?
Yeah, so I think there are other parts of being an RP that are really beneficial when it comes to property development and kind of retrofit schemes and accessing energy efficiency improvements. We recently looked at a property where it's quite agricultural. It's in the country. There's no gas supply there. The cost to have gas put into that area was astronomical, just under £200,000 just to get gas in the street. And so we were looking at options and we were looking at solar panels. And what we found is that there was lots of funding and government grants for improvements for RPs or for home owners. But when you then look at it as a charity with accommodation, suddenly you're not eligible for those grants. And that's definitely quite a challenge. There is funding available for charities, there are resources, but quite often they're not to do with property development. Or if they are, they're generally linked to CQC managed services, which ours aren't. So that's been quite an interesting, not nice
No.
discovery that we've made. Um, and accessing kind of different local authorities. Actually, there are some local authorities that are quite up to date and quite hot on what services provide. They're quite confident in their due diligence. Some local authorities have even started to employ teams to look at supported accommodation reviewing, even though it wasn't necessarily an expectation before the supported oversight bill. However, some local authorities are really clear. It is actually, we will only provide exempt housing benefit for registered providers.
Because they can ensure that there's like a level of assurance there because they've had to meet the regulatory standards. Is that
Absolutely.
why?
I
Yeah.
would say that, if you know that somebody is being monitored and audited by the RSH, they're doing those due diligence checks, they're making sure they're financially sound and efficient and there's no kind of dodginess going on, as well as obviously the cost to the local authority being a huge impact as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? So, because historically, there's lots of small housing associations like you guys all over the country who've popped up to meet a need, often for more specialist housing where people have got maybe more complex needs, or because there wasn't an RP that was doing that in the area, there wasn't anything else. And so what we're seeing is a lot of these organisations all over the country, the pressures have got worse over the last few years, haven't they? I think for you guys, I think, whereas in the past maybe local authorities had a bit more flux in their budget, they probably could cover that. We're not seeing that now, are we, so much? So things really are getting tougher.
Yes, and I think that's where you see an increase in partnership working, in underleasing and working with registered providers. And I think that's a fantastic thing to do. And there is, lots of different registered providers out there that are understanding of what that more specialist accommodation is, and they are happy to link in with a support provider. But when you think about how many people there are in the chain there, actually for services like our own, there is a real benefit to becoming an RP and being able to provide accommodation, whether Havencare staff are supporting that individual or not, because actually there aren't many landlords providers who would be comfortable with quite significant changes within a property, adjustments being made, fixtures and fittings in bathrooms that will need to be potentially taking out in the future, and there's quite a lot of work and heavy wear and tear that can go into services. And so I think it is a real it's a real need, but also not the most simple process to become an RP. And I think that's possibly where some of those smaller providers have struggled and maybe just chosen to continue working with an RP. Because when you look at the due diligence and expectations for that application for an RP, they might not be able to meet those needs on their own.
No, and I mean, to become an RP is a real challenge at the moment, isn't it? There's quite a significant cost involved in it, and there's quite a significant time burden, and we're seeing a lot of applications being turned down, aren't we, at the
I think it's
moment?
80%, isn't
Is
it?
it
To get,
that high? I
I
know it was
think,
high.
yeah,
Goodness.
I think it's about 80% are rejected at the first hurdle, and I think there's an even further percentage that choose to pull out of the process completely after their first initial maybe decline, or because of the cost
Yeah.
involved, cost for application, the cost for if a service maybe doesn't have that level of diligence involved with their finances and auditing and HR stuff, then absolutely, if you're a really small provider, it's a lot.
It's a big challenge, isn't it, to get through? And I think, it felt like it was an intentional decision to make it harder to become an RP because I think there were some for-profit organisations that were definitely trying to register as a way to
Yes.
tap into enhanced housing benefit. And so I think, the backdrop to that probably was a sound evidence. But
Absolutely, and I think I have a real hope that the supported oversight bill will improve some of those worries, risks, and concerns over supported accommodation. I think we all understand our fields of work and we all understand the roles that we work in. But it's absolutely understandable that there is concerns within local authorities assessing a housing benefit claim for a charity who you could look them up and you think, well, I'm not sure. I don't know whether do they understand housing? The two sides are really different. Have they got somebody, a fit person to make sure that housing legislation is met, that they're meeting their due diligence? Do they even know what gas safety is? And so you can understand why some of those, you can't expect a housing benefit assessor to be an expert in every single type of supported housing that exists when they all come through on the same application.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there had been, I know some commentators had hoped that with the Oversight Act that they would take away this sort of 60%, 100% difference, and that actually it would just be like you met a supported housing requirement or a certain standard, and therefore you would, the local authority could reclaim 100% of the rents back if they met the standard for exempt rents. That doesn't seem to be what's happening, does it, from that? So.
I've not seen it in there. I've seen some interesting things on the consultation. I've had a brief look. I set aside a good couple of hours next week to have a really good read of it. But
I know I keep opening it and going, yeah, I really need to get back into
section
that.
by section, I think actually I need to set some time for it. But I think
The large coffee, I think, yeah.
I think the plus side will be, and I think the big thing for me, and I've really talked about it for a long time, is it needs to have very clear. This is what a domestic violence refuge would be filling in an application. This is what a homeless service would be filling in, and providing housing benefit teams with the confidence to go, this is what this person is providing. I'm filling in the same form, making the same application, but explaining that somebody has 24-hour care. And actually that's really difficult for a housing benefit assessor to go, and what role does a housing officer then have? How are they providing support? And why do they need that if somebody has 3 members of staff every day? And those sorts of challenges are completely understandable for housing benefit assessors, but having some really clear guidance on that, maybe for those housing benefit assessors who aren't as au fait with the services in their city. I think that bit, I'm positive on that. I'm going to stay positive on that, but absolutely, I think that, there shouldn't be a reason why a charity providing the same offer as an RP, there should be a cost difference for local authorities. It's not fair, really, and it shouldn't mean that a tenant has to potentially top up their rent. And I think that's the bit that's a real driver for me to push us forward for RP if the oversight bill doesn't change some of that, because actually our tenants shouldn't have to top up their rent just because there isn't that clear legislation on why they need that supported housing model.
It causes a big inequality, doesn't it? And that's it's not
Absolutely.
fair. It's going to be really interesting, isn't it, to see what happens as it all comes into play and what that's going to mean for everybody. But I think it's really interesting to hear, from your side of it. And I think it's also interesting for people out there like care providers and property investors when they're working with housing associations to understand whether that housing association is registered with the Regulator of Social Housing or isn't, and what that means. And then also understand this partnership arrangements that might be in place and why they'll be in place, because they'll enable that organisation to be able to work with those enhanced benefits and get the local authority to reclaim those rents. So there's a lot of complexity, as with all supported housing and supported living, but it's been really good to just kind of dig into what that means, Alice. So thank you for explaining that to us.
No, thank you very much. Thank you for having me again.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you're finding this content useful, then maybe it's time you join the Supported Living Property Network. If you're not already a member, then let me explain what's included. The network is a unique community of property investors and providers coming together to create quality supported living homes. If you're a property investor, you can list property on our portal for our provider members to see. You can access the demand portal where our providers list where they need property, so you can buy property to order. If you're a provider, you can access the property portal to see where our members have property available for you to lease, and you can list where you need property. We do not charge any additional introduction or sourcing fees. You also get access to our monthly training sessions with industry experts to help you understand supported living property and keep up to date. You get access to our monthly online networking sessions to help you connect with property investors and providers. I've written 2 training courses, one for providers and one for property investors, to help you get started in supported living property. We have a membership area filled with resources that you need, where you can watch the previous training sessions too. You get all of this for only £47.50 plus VAT a month. And because we do not want you to stay unless you think it's incredible value, you can leave at any time. Just give us 14 days notice. Simply go to www.supportedlivingproperty.uk. That's www.supportedlivingproperty.uk to join us now.